Hey y'all, if you've been told to avoid squats or it's something you kind of just stop doing on your own because that's when you notice those wet spots in your underwear, then you're definitely not alone. I want to talk about something that's not said enough, and it's that avoiding these movements really isn't the way to go. It actually could be the reason that your leaks haven't stopped. So in today's video, I'm going to break down why what you don't do is just as important as what you do for your pelvic health and why your pelvic health actually starts outside of the gym. So let's get into it. So I want to start with a little story. I once had a client tell me that her doctor told her to never squat again. And I was kind of dumbfounded. It actually took me by surprise. I'm like, your doctor told you to what? And so I want to preface this by saying there are definitely times where we have surgeries or we have restrictions based on procedures that have been completed, and we're in an acute phase of healing, meaning we're in the first month or so of having these procedures done. Absolutely, you always should listen to your doctor and the person who performed the procedure as far as like what that healing process looks like. But outside of that, telling someone to never squat again just really baffles me, because squatting is living. You have to squat to tie your shoes, to put on your underwear, to pick up groceries from the floor. To avoid squatting is just like avoid living. That's like telling a woman like stop living in your body, because those are things that we just have to do to get through the day, get through the moments of the day. And so when I heard this, it actually, a light bulb went off in my head, and I was like, okay, this is kind of where the disconnection from our bodies begin. It could be either by poor advice, advice that's not within the context of how that person lives. It could be just avoidance based on what we think is going to help us. And so we kind of shut off a part of our bodies, because if you avoid movements or you don't do things, then you start to believe these stories in your head that like, oh, I don't do that, or I don't jump, I don't run, I don't squat, because that's when the leaks happen. But little do you know, that's actually going to exaggerate the symptoms and prolong your journey of stopping the leaks altogether. And so I just wanted to share that story because again, squatting is living. And when we avoid movements, which I'll break down a little bit more as we get further into the video, that actually can contribute to the leaks, it's definitely not going to make them stop. All right. So the first point that I want to make about this is, why does this matter for your pelvic floor? It actually, in my personal and professional opinion, can be really dangerous to the pelvic floor and your body when you start to truly believe that you shouldn't do something or you need to avoid doing anything. Our pelvic floor is a part of our core. Our pelvic floor is connected to our pelvis, which is the center of our body. So there's leg muscles, there's back muscles, there's abdominal muscles that all connect, hip muscles that all connect to our pelvis. And so those same muscles support your pelvic floor. Your pelvic floor supports your core. So when you avoid squatting, for example, because that's the main position that I'm talking about in today's video, when you really avoid squatting, again, you create a disconnect, and you also weaken the muscles around not only your pelvic floor, but around other parts of your pelvis. There are some really large muscle groups that we need. Your hamstrings, your glutes, like those muscles need to activate in order for you to squat and bend and twist. And when you avoid those motions, then all those things start to slowly weaken over time. And when I mentioned the disconnect before, when you're not doing those activities or you find compensation, sometimes you overwork muscles that really aren't designed to take on that kind of load. And then you completely disconnect and weaken the muscles that should be taking on that load. So I hope you can start to see that avoiding movements isn't the way to go. Now, sure, in the short term, if you feel like, okay, I leak when I run, so I'm not going to run anymore, maybe that gives you a little bit of solace of like, okay, the leaks happen less. But over time, that's just not going to work, because you may have to sprint to run and catch your dog or your kid. You may have to bend down quickly or prevent yourself from falling, if from a quick reaction. And so those things are going to happen. And you may find that like what used to be a little trickle has now turned into a complete loss of control. And that is definitely not what we want. So we don't want to avoid movements. We want to first figure out why you're leaking in the first place. And then as part of your plan, or for my clients, what we do is we first get to the root of the leakage, and then we slowly develop and build a plan that gets them back to those high level activities like squatting, running, jumping, because those are just things that we need to be able to do in our lives. And another point I want to make about disconnecting from our bodies is that we begin to lose trust. And where there's no trust, fear can kind of weave in and just take over. And so when you're fearful of something, one, your body has a natural reaction. You can produce tension. You can hang on to tension. You can create muscle guarding where you really just don't do these movements or you're afraid. And so that produces tension. And guess what? The pelvic floor and the pelvis. And your pelvic floor is just not going to operate optimally when it's always on guard. And that can actually create more leaks as well. So it's not just one thing, it's very multifaceted. And our body's like a chain. There is a ripple effect. If you avoid a movement here, it does impact the later lines of the chain in a sense, or the later links in the chain, which is what we don't want. So again, we don't want to avoid movements. We first want to figure out why is the leakage happening in the first place, and then we can build from there so that fear doesn't set in and create more leaks, and again, a longer road to stopping the leaks, which is what we all want. All right. So, where does this disconnect begin? So, like I mentioned before, when my client told me that, I kind of had an aha moment of like, oh, when we get bad advice or we start to self medicate or self solve, our problems, that's when we slowly start to disconnect from some key muscle groups and key areas of our body. And so, when that disconnection begins, we don't use that part of our body. And so, you've heard the term you snooze, you lose. It's kind of like that with your muscles. If we're not using them, if we're not walking, if we're not squatting, if we're not bending, and I know that sounds probably like out of the box, but there are people who literally like, oh no, I don't do that. That's when the leakage happens. Or no, I will not run. I will not walk quickly because they're so stuck, in the fear of a bad episode happening or losing control or an embarrassing moment. And that's a valid fear. Like no one wants to lose control of urine when they're not on the toilet. And with that being said, though, if you stay in that cycle, you kind of stay in the leaks. So we don't want to avoid movements. We want to kind of figure out where that fear is coming from and how do we get to the root of it. And so back to my if you snooze, you lose comment. If you're not using those muscle groups, you will start to lose function, power, strength, endurance. And so that goes for anything. It's kind of like if you were training just to be able to run a mile, just a simple goal, would you sit on the couch? Probably not. You may start with walking, then a light jog, then to a full run, but you wouldn't avoid the activity that you want to succeed in. It's the same thing for some of my elderly patients that I've treated in the clinic before. One big connection to falls is not being able to get up and down from the floor. So you don't necessarily have to be elderly, but I've heard many people say, oh no, I don't get on the floor because I don't know if I'm gonna be able to get back up. And so one of the same things that I cannot not address as a physical therapist is like, that's what you need to do. You need to get on the floor. You need to get on your knees. You need to get on your hands and knees, because that is how we practice, and that is how we keep parts of our balance active, certain muscles active, certain parts of our sensory system active, is by doing the activity. We don't want to avoid the activity, and we don't want to lose function by not doing something because we're afraid. And so when you're working with a professional like myself, whether it be a physical therapist or, even occupational therapists, our pelvic health specialists as well, regardless or irregardless of who you're working with, we would work together on a plan that helps you get back to that activity. So there's all kinds of modifications with how heavy the resistance is. Are we using weights? Are we not using weights? How are we loading these muscle groups? Like those are things that we get into, but there are some key foundation pieces that we need before the exercises will work. And so again, we don't want to avoid movements. We just want to always figure out where the leaks and why the leaks are happening, and then get into some key components of what needs to be in place for any exercise to work. So how do we get there? So you'll hear me say often, your pelvic health is your overall health. And the reason I say that is because there is no separation. When you're taking care of your body, you're taking care of your pelvic health. And so that's why your pelvic health or taking care of it starts outside of the gym. Like when you start a new exercise program or you're trying to lose weight, you're not just exercising, you're looking at your sleep, you're looking at your water intake, you're looking at your nutrition. And so these are things that also impact your pelvic health, your stress level. I actually have a video that I highly recommend you watch where I break down 4 pillars in my STOP method that need to be in place in order for any pelvic health exercise to work. And the reason that's so important is because your pelvic floor, is like the foundation of your body. It's like the foundation of your house. The pelvic floor is the foundation, your body is the house. And so you wouldn't build a house on shaky ground. And in order for you to have a strong foundation for your pelvic floor, we need to dial into how you're sleeping, how stress is affecting your body. Do you have an outlet? Do you know the triggers in your diet that are actually making your leaks and your urgency and frequency worse? Do you know the things in your diet that are stopping you from going to the bathroom, having a bowel movement every day? So those are key things that no matter how many exercises you're doing, it will not work without that strong foundation. I'm a physical therapist, so I can give you probably hundreds. I could come up with different exercises that I could just blanketly give people, but it's not going to help if those other key components aren't working or being addressed. And so the last point that I want to make is that, you don't need a fancy gym membership. You don't need a million different exercises. You really just need you. And again, I firmly believe that starts with reconnection. How can we figure out what works best for you when you are stressed? Because as we know, stress is going to come. That's not something that we can predict. It's not something that we can eliminate. But what are we doing to offset that? What are the plans in place that you have for one-on-one time for yourself? And how can you begin to recognize when these things are off kilter? That is really what you need first. And then we can get into the exercise portion and what's working to resolve your leakage. All right, so that is the end of today's video. Very quick and dirty, but I hope that this begins to make sense for you as to why taking care of your pelvic health really starts outside of the gym. It really starts with you. I want this to resonate with you all that, there's nothing you got to go out and buy. There's no gym membership that you have to go out and get, but we cannot ignore the things that are contributing to the problem, which a lot of times aren't as tangible. It's not just doing Kegels. It's not getting the next program or subscribing to another program. It's really looking within, and let's figure out what are some things that are contributing to your leakage that may have nothing to do with exercise, actually. So I hope that this resonates with all of you. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. And if you want to dig deeper one-on-one with me, please don't forget to click the link in my description so that you can apply for us to work together. As always, thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.